Well, I am really excited today here on Lessons from Last Time to be meeting with my friend Natalie Overturf. Natalie, we have known each other for a minute.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I was actually thinking on my drive over here this morning how long we have known each other. And it was before my daughters were born and they're getting ready to turn 19.
It was early 2000, don't know the exact year,
Yeah.
but I moved over to the West Vancouver branch for First Horizon and you were there. And we'll get into your backstory on how you got into the business and all that stuff. But we've known each other for a while. I've always been a raving fan. And today, because Ken's at the MBA, I get to just chat with you by myself. So thank you, Ken, for allowing me to be here. And thank you, Nat, for coming in. I know you got a busy packed schedule, so thanks for making time.
Yes, of course. I could not be more excited to be here. I was telling you guys, I am definitely part of the Knowledge Coop, 𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗃𝗃 podcast fan club. So I'm having a little bit of imposter syndrome being here. I'm so excited.
Well, and shameless plug, you shared when you walked in the door that you were doing your CE right now on the Knowledge Coop website.
That's right.
So we're pretty jazzed about
Yes,
that.
I
Love to have people utilizing the resources. So let's talk about origin story a little bit. Let's talk about where Natalie came from and how you got into the business in the first place. I know you've shared that story with me before, but to me, it's a fascinating story about your roots and then what led you into the mortgage business.
Yeah, so I hit 30 years in the business last year. So
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've lived like 3 lifetimes in this industry, it feels like. And I think we just started another one over this last 18 months. So I grew up, my dad was in the Navy. I was a military brat, moved around a lot. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I remember Ken saying that he went to 20 different schools. I was very similar. I went to a lot of different schools until my dad settled in Eastern Washington. My dad was a Master Chief in the Navy. He was on nuclear submarines. I'm very proud of my father and his service. And so he wound up at the power plant in Tri-Cities. So that's a little bit of my backstory. You know, I'm oldest child of a Master Chief. There's a little bit of that, you know, you want to make your dad proud. So,
First child.
as I've psychoanalyzed myself over the years, you know, I've looked back on that. But I went to college at BYU, Idaho in Rexburg. 30 below zero weather, take a parka in the wintertime.
Walk to class.
I dropped out my second year. I just wasn't feeling it. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I wanted to make money. I was very money motivated at that time. I just felt broke and wanted some money. And so I went back home, got a job as a temporary receptionist at US Bank's mortgage department. I was 19 because I graduated high school at 17. And it was in 92 when rates had just dropped from like 18, you know, to like 8%, and everybody was refinancing. And so I got very lucky with timing. They needed a processor and then they were going to pay me more money. So I'm like, yes, sign me up, and quickly moved into processing. I went to a realtor event. One of my loan officers took me. They called it the realtor sipper. If you sip, you know, that's what they called it back in that day. And I met a gal who was with another mortgage company, and we just hit it off. And she's like, what do you do? And I told her, and she's like, you're in the wrong job. You should be a loan officer. And I'm like, will you pay me more money? And she said, yes. And so since I was very money motivated at that time, I took the leap into being a loan officer. And that was just in a day when they would let you, like, it was before a lot of the regulation and compliance, and you could literally learn by just completely falling flat in your face.
And there was no NMLS. There was no,
It was such a different day. So I did that for a couple of years and made quite good money, relatively speaking, for that time. And 94 came around, and nobody told me the interest rates could go up, even, you know, as they are going down. And I'm just like, oh my God, I literally, like, the spigot just turned off. I had no business. I was broke. I had spent every last dime because, you know, I wanted to have the nice clothes, and I bought a new car. And
Mama's got to have shoes.
Yes. Yeah. Oh gosh, I was having just the time. I had a very fun 2 years, but I definitely paid for it at the end because I had not a lick of savings. And it was a very dark time for me. I felt very, useless, without purpose, just what do I do from here? And I actually got out of the business for a short period of time.
So let me ask you about that, just for understanding. That feeling of uselessness comes from what, you didn't complete a degree, so if you didn't make it in this world, what are you going to do? Because you don't have a direction? Yeah,
no direction, just felt like a failure. You know, I hold myself up to a very high standard when I look at my father and all of his achievements. He was the youngest Master Chief in the Navy at the time.
Oh, wow.
You know, he was very decorated. So yeah, I was embarrassed, very embarrassed. A lot of shame came with that. I was in my early 20s. Luckily, I was not married. I did not have children. So the collateral damage was just here, thank goodness. But it was a very early, valuable life lesson for me in the mortgage industry. And I got out and I actually went to work at JCPenney's for about 6 months.
That's right.
And I will tell you what, working on your feet and retail, and we were commissioned. And I will tell you, some of those girls that had been there for a while were sharks. They'd steal your customer. I mean, it was like this whole new world. But I remember coming home that first night. My feet were burning. It was on concrete in heels. It was like terrible. And I'm just like, this is hard work. Like, this is a different kind of hard week.
And
work,
you are competing.
Yeah. So it's minimum wage plus commission. So,
funny story, Nat. My daughter dropped out of college because she just wasn't feeling it. And she went to work at Nordstrom's, working in one of the women's departments. And she came to me and said, I will not elbow another woman out of the way to get that sale. Hire me as your receptionist. And she came on board as a receptionist, and she started doing order out. Then she started doing, some light processing or LOA type stuff. And now she is a loan officer in the mortgage business, but had this stellar career as a processor, then LOA.
It's a great way to start in the business.
Well, that's one thing I want to chat about. We're called lessons from last time, but one of the repeatable lessons that I keep hearing from people in this business is that have been successful over decades was they either from the very beginning learned the business the right way, or they eventually, by bloodying their noses often enough, had to learn the business the right way. And you talk about getting in as a processor and understanding how a loan gets put together before you got into the sales side of it.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how that benefited your career as you move forward.
Well, I feel like it gives me a different perspective as a leader because I have been on the operations side of the business. It helps me help my originators in a different way, but it helped me greatly as a loan officer. Like, people used to fight over me to be, for who got my files, which I still have a lot of pride. In fact, I just did my own personal, well, I didn't originate, but I did I did a home loan in June. And of course I put my own package together and I got a one and done, of course, through underwriting.
Of course.
So
of course.
I was so proud of myself. But in fact, my processor, when I was at GMEC, we talked, she's my underwriting manager now, and her and I still kind of joke about that today, that, I still am very proud of that. So I think it just helps you learn the fundamentals of the business. And we're kind of back to that, the two and two, the 30 days pay stubs, the 2 months bank statements, 2 years tax returns, looking at everything today. So our business kind of comes in and out of those, of those cycles. So it's been highly beneficial for me.
So you make your way to GMAC. That was your first entree in retail mortgage origination. Is that correct?
It wasn't, actually. Oh. So just to back up a little bit, I had got out of the business.
Right.
I met my husband and told him, about my past career. He's like, why are you not doing this still? Because I loved it. And I was just afraid to fail again. And my husband's like, seriously, you're crazy. You should get back in. So I've had a really good friend that was a broker of a real estate company. She had just taken a job at John L. Scott's real estate office in Vancouver. She was originally from Tri-Cities, and it happened to be Bill Weidman and Don Meggs, who ran the John L. Scott office in Vancouver. And I talked to her. She's like, well, it just so happens we need a lender. And so I went and jumped back into lending as an in-house loan officer at John L. Scott. And I did that for a few years. And then I went to GMAC.
Okay. So you were a couple of years at John L. Scott.
I was.
Okay.
I was.
And I'd forgotten that if I knew that.
It was a good, starting ground for me to get to know agents. I still have friendships with those agents all these years later, keep in contact with them. But it just winds up being too restrictive, as far as working with agents outside of that. And that's when I went to GMAC and I went to work for Jeff Schaller and Chris Altig at GMAC at that time.
That's where the connection began.
That is where it comes into play. Yeah. Yes.
And then down the road, you and I both worked for Chris as district managers with First Horizon before MetLife took over and went that direction. And that's where we met, was in the West Side First Horizon office. Jeff got promoted, I believe, is what happened, and they needed a branch manager for that.
I think he got promoted to district manager.
That's what it was.
Yes.
And Chris approached me about managing that office, which I had no business doing because I was about, 18 months in the business and didn't know my head from a hole in the ground.
I could say that for all of us at one time. So
yeah, that's a different story. But learned as I went, and that's where I got to meet you, and that's where our friendship began. And I got to watch a consummate professional continue to craft her skills in this business. And that value you brought at John L. Scott will go back. That value you brought as a processor, understanding how a loan is structured, understanding what a loan needs to look like in order for it to get a one and done or get put through the system efficiently and effectively. Realtors really appreciate loan officers who know what they're doing.
Absolutely.
In fact, Allison and I were chatting earlier about, she has not been in the business, and she talked about, why don't more realtors and loan officers work together effectively? Because we don't trust each other.
Yes,
because
that's right.
we don't believe that loan officer really knows what they're doing. So you brought that to a group of realtors at John L. Scott. They have high confidence in you. Now you go take that skill set to GMAC and then later First Horizon. Talk about how that facilitated your success.
Well, it was this comes back to lessons I've learned in my career, in my lifetime. I had a great team at GMAC. I worked with Jeff and Chris, and they decided to make a departure and move to First Horizon. I decided not to. I got offered an opportunity to take over as the branch manager at GMAC, and I almost didn't take it, Kirk, because I was very drawn to want to go work with my friends, and I felt a little bit like a traitor. And once again, my husband is, he's the cooler head that prevails. And we talked a lot. I have my, your internal board of directors that, my dad, my husband, my mom, my siblings. I have a couple of very close friends, and they're just like, you're crazy. They're offering you this opportunity. You should take it. And, our inner critic is like, I can't do it. I'm not worthy. Kind of like, you jumping in at 18 months.
Myself, yeah.
So I just decided I'm going to do it. And it happened to be in 2003, which wound up being one of the biggest years in my career. I did almost $60 million in personal production that year at $185,000 average loan amount. So
I was going to say,
it's a lot of
amounts
loans.
were a little different back then.
A lot of loans. I had built a little branch there. But at the end of that year, my husband and I had decided we wanted to start a family, and I was dealing with infertility at that time. And so I made the decision to step out of leadership because I knew I needed to really focus on myself personally and what was going on for my family. And so I called Chris and said, I think I want to make a change and step out of leadership and just go back and originate. And so, that was a little humbling for me to have to take that step back, but it was one of the best decisions I ever made as far as, what I needed personally versus what was maybe best professionally for me at the time. And my husband and I did go through the in vitro process. I wound up getting pregnant with twins in 2004.
Which is a incredible summarization of that experience, because I know there was some hardship in that experience.
Lots of hardship, lots of tears. Like when you're going through infertility, everybody around you is getting pregnant. Like, my sister could bat her eyes and get pregnant. It made no sense to me. Like, why me? There's a lot of, the world is unfair when you're going through that. But in the end, it turned out to be such a blessing. And my daughters actually just graduated from high school, and they both just ventured off into their new journeys. So I cannot even believe it'll be 19 on this Friday, actually.
My goodness.
So, honestly, the most lessons I've learned about life and leadership has been from being a parent. So,
of course.
I actually told Lindsay called me this morning. One of my daughters is in Florence at NYU, and our times are different. So, her evening is my morning. So she calls me every morning, and I told her about doing this podcast, and she's like, what's the name of it, Mom? And I said, well, it's lessons from last time. I go, Lindsay, they're actually asking me about my lessons, the ones I tell you all about. And she's like, Mom, they're asking you. That's the difference. I'm like, ooh, touche, my friend, touche. So
it's the unsolicited lesson. She's not
I'll tell you.
Like any daughter.
Apparently you need to be asked to be sharing your life lessons. So, but yes, they are the joy of my life and my crowning achievement. I've been married for 25 years now. So my husband has been my biggest supporter and champion. I do believe that support system, it's taking care of the things that matter most, which to me, my job is important, but my family and my support system is
the why is your family, the job is the what and the how.
That's right. And I love my family. My family, my work is my family, but it's not, who I go to bed with every night and who I have to answer to truly.
But at home with that partner, you've had just support from day one.
It's amazing. My husband, when we had my husband's a teacher, and he taught 5th grade at La Center Elementary School, actually. And when we had the girls, we looked at just financially, like for twins, for daycare, it was going to be like $1,500 a month. And it was like, gosh, financially, it doesn't make a lot of sense. He was a new teacher. He wasn't making that much. And obviously my income potential as an originator was much higher. So we made the decision, and he made the decision. I will tell you, it was, it was a big sacrifice for him, I will tell you. Men staying home don't get looked at the same way as women staying home.
Especially 20 years ago.
Even by women in the industry, which was just so disappointing. You know, I'd tell them and they'd be like, oh, when's he coming back to work? Is he going to go back to work when they go to school? I'm like, gosh, I hope not. I really like having someone that holds our household down. So he's been a true partner and champion of mine, and I just couldn't be more blessed.
Well, and what an archaic way of thinking for all of us to presume that one gender over the other should be staying at home when opportunity, as far as providing for the family, opportunity would speak this direction, but to be stuck in some paradigm that says it has to be.
Well, and I wound up traveling a lot when the girls were younger because I took the district management role. And honestly, 2 parents working and 1 traveling, and just there would have been repercussions for us with our children. And so it wound up being there's no criticism on people who make a different choice. But for me, for our family, I credit my husband for who my girls are today, just because he was the stabilizing force.
Well, as long as I've known you, you have always been a cheerleader for your husband and his role in your success, which is how it should be, regardless of who's doing what.
Well, I'm proud of that. I'm proud we were able to make it work. It's not easy. You know, there definitely are, at certain times, there were times when I wish I was home, and there were times he wishes he was out working. You know, there definitely were those struggles over the years. But, we're empty nesters now, and it's so weird to look at that. I mean, that's a whole other
another podcast. Yes.
Oh my gosh, yes. Parenting adult children and being an empty nester is just a whole nother journey.
If you are watching this podcast and you're in the mortgage industry and you haven't checked out the Knowledge Coop, you definitely need to dive into the Knowledge Coop. In there, you will find content and community that will help you grow as an individual by learning everything there is to know about the mortgage industry. If you think you know everything, just dive in and take some classes, because there's always something more you can learn. To be successful in this business, you've got to continually learn. In addition, if you're a company and you want to teach your people in your own environment, we've got that in the Knowledge Coop Enterprise Services. So reach out to us, check out knowledgecoop.com. Definitely join Coop Plus. Let's get back to the podcast.
One of the things that's defined your career for me as an outside observer is your consistency and your commitment. And I don't simply mean to the business, I mean to a team. And if we were going in a different direction with this conversation, in fact, if the shoe was on the other foot and you were interviewing me, one of the legitimate questions, if you get into the subject of regret, was, do you regret making the changes you've made? And I would have to say, I kind of do, because I knee-jerked a little too much when I saw the market flexing or moving, and I made more changes than I really think would have best served my career. You, on the other hand, were very consistent. And not just a commitment to a group of people, but commitment to an idea and a leadership style and a group of people, including leaders, but also teammates. And that has kind of defined your career. I mean, you've changed business cards a few times, but that's only because of acquisition for the most part.
100%.
After the move to GMAC, it was First Horizon, MetLife, and then everything that followed from there was a group of people staying true to a course and true to a core. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah. So First Horizon, I was there in the 07-08 meltdown, and they became, a casualty of the construction lending market at that time. And we wound up having to sell. I mean, they told us we're either selling or winding down. And they sold us to MetLife, which at the time was really a godsend, because Met was a big brand. We knew we had capital and stability, and we had Snoopy, which my daughters were young, and they thought that was super cool that I worked for Snoopy. So, what I have figured out over the years, so from MetLife in 2011 decided they didn't want to be subject to Dodd-Frank. And because just that small bank would have opened the enterprise to being regulated by the Dodd-Frank legislation. So they decided to either sell us or wind us down. And they actually wound up winding us down. Luckily, my leader, 𝗪𝗏𝗍𝗪, and a team of us had already been looking at plan Bs. And we decided to go to Home Street as a team. And we kept almost 100% of our team intact through that transition. And that they gave us 2 weeks, basically, to get apps on. We had 2 weeks basically to make that transition. I mean, I look back on that now, I'm not even sure how we pulled it off, but we did. And we got temp spaces. It just shows what a team of people working together can achieve and accomplish.
Well, and when you say almost 100%, that's not just almost 100% in Southwest Washington.
Oh, no.
That's almost 100% in the Northwest region.
Correct. It was about 500 people.
It was extraordinary.
Yeah, it was about 500
And it was quite a burden for Home Street to take on at the time,
Yeah,
because they were a small regional bank.
People were working 24/7. It was just a lot of sacrifice, but a lot of reward on the other side. And that was a great home for us for 8 years. And then we wound up, HomeStreet went public. We got an activist investor. As a publicly traded company, you serve a different master. The mortgage market was in a real, slump in 2018, if you recall.
Uncertain.
Very uncertain. And we got the notification. I had to go under NDA, got the notification that they were going to sell the mortgage entity. And Rosemary and I we kind of laugh about this story now, but Rosemary's my leader. She's been my leader since 2011, but her and I worked together since 2004-ish. But we were in tears. Like, what are we going to do? The mortgage industry was losing money. Like, who's going to want to buy us? And we got very fortunate that HomeStreet, gave us a lot of freedom and autonomy in going out to find the right partner for us. I mean, they had to say okay, but they knew if they didn't have the people, they wouldn't have a sale. So we wound up going to Homebridge, which Homebridge wound up being a wonderful home for us. We had a 98%, once again, pull over ratio again. Plus, we had added teammates along the way. And then last year, about November, Peter Norton, who is our CEO at Homebridge, was very transparent on a couple of calls where he talked about just the corporate cost structure of this industry that had just ballooned between regulation and the staffing dilemma and all of those things that make it so hard to be in this business. And he just said, if there's an opportunity for us to combine forces with another company to acquire or potentially merge, he never said be acquired because I think he knew that would freak people out. He's like, we are definitely looking at those things. So we knew it was on the table. He was very early in that. And we got the notification mid-March, and I didn't get a heads up ahead of time this time around. I found out on Sunday, and the announcement happened on Monday, that we would be acquired by CMG, and that would be effective April 1st. So we had 2 weeks notice to make a move. I am so proud of how my people, and I cannot take credit for this. A lot of this is just our culture. We are family. I will say, I will tell, corporate culture is a hard thing because it can change from company to company. You have to have a heart of leadership and vision within your community that you work with directly. You cannot depend on the company, right? Because we know companies come and go.
And they have really different priorities depending upon which part of the country you're in.
So the heartbeat has to be with the leadership. That's who people have to be connected to. We lost 2 people out of, I don't know, we're 500-600 people through that transition. And
it's not because other companies weren't going after
Oh
them.
my gosh.
I mean, you and I both know Matt Ellerding, who was here on the show a few weeks back. And Matt's one of the top producers down here. And literally everybody were lining up to take a shot at Matt.
It almost works for you in those situations because there's so much noise. And it comes, one of my favorite books is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It's my Bible of leadership. Your core foundation has to be trust. Like you cannot go anywhere. And we have a very long-term tenured team that has a lot of trust that will say, if you guys think this is okay, we're on board. But they know they can trust us, right? They have history with us. We've proven that over the years. So yes, it's one of the things that Rosemary and our team are probably the most proud of. I mean, we could probably teach a master class at this point on change management and leading through change because we've done it so many times. But what you recognize at the end of the day is that it doesn't matter the shingle on your door, really. It is about the people. And Bob Goff is a great author. He wrote a book called Love Does, and I got to see him speak at a Building Champions event probably 6 or 7 years ago. And he just said, make your foundation of leadership, and everybody's a leader in some way, about love. And that's a very, especially for men, it's a little touchy-feely.
It's referred to as the soft skills.
The soft skills. Yeah. And people, I would say today, are more attracted to soft skills than they are to hard skills. Not that those are not important, because they are. You have to have the fundamentals. You have to have the business acumen. You have to be able to run a profitable enterprise. But the soft skills of loving your people, loving them through it. And that's honestly right now what we're doing with our people. Like, we're giving them the things they need to be successful, and we're just loving them through it. This is the hardest market I've seen in my career, and it's just probably going to get tougher the next few months.
And that theme of loving your people and being mission-oriented rather than metrics-oriented has been a consistent, just like the leadership team that you've stayed with, that message has been consistent through as much of your career as I've known. And it's fascinating because you see it if you follow either you or 𝗪𝗏𝗧 David on LinkedIn or any of the social media. That message is consistent. It just keeps coming through. Our people matter. We care about our people. We're going to make decisions in a transparent way. We're going to move forward. And you talk about lessons from last time. My goodness, we're not speaking to the idiosyncrasies of what got you through 08, 09. We're just talking about this common theme of what got you through was a commitment to a team, a group of people who had a shared vision, and then just marching forward through the really diverse markets that you were in and logos that you wore. I mean, you had no control over that, but somehow you all ended up wearing the same logo. And what mattered was the heartbeat of the team that you were committed to and how that carried you through. That's what I'm hearing in the lessons for last time.
Well,
context.
I'm reading The Obstacle is the Way right now. I'm about halfway through it. And it's all things we know, but really intuitively we know these things. But the obstacle is the way, Kurt. And when I talk to people today, they want certainty. I can't give them certainty and what's going to happen with mortgage rates or what's going to happen with the economy. What I can give them certainty about is who I am as a leader and who my team is. And I can show them my track record. Like I have managers that have worked. In fact, 𝗟𝗏𝗱𝗲 𝗀 just retired.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I've worked with
What a
her
great
for 23 years.
Yeah.
It was sad and happy for her all at the same time. But I'm at a point in my career where I have people that I've hired that are now retiring. But to be able to show a path that we got you, even if it's not with the same company. And we're in a financial services industry. This is about dollars and cents at the end of the day. And companies and owners will have to make decisions that are not personal, but they feel personal, right? People always say business isn't personal. Everything's personal.
Yep.
We feel it all. And so, for me, it's just that consistency. I mean, I put my Calendly link in my signature. I want my people to be able to get a hold of me at any time. I'm a divisional. I've got 250 loan officers. But honestly, if you drop into my calendar, I will get on the phone with you because you are my number one priority. And I mean that. I'm not just saying that. I put those words into action every day.
Well, we did that just as friends, trying to reconnect.
Yes,
we were able to
absolutely.
spend some time on the phone catching
Absolutely.
up. And it's proven itself true. And it's remarkable that because the obstacle is the way, the impediment to action becomes the action, right? It's Marcus Aurelius's principles of life that you're gonna run into obstacles, and that's not the question. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I read a book years ago. I went through the Seth Godin's Alt MBA program. It's not an MBA program. It's definitely an alternative 30-day course on creative thinking and problem solving. But there's a book in there called Beautiful Constraint. And it talks about the constraints that end up in our path as we move forward in any direction outside of our control. And it talks about this principle of flipping constraints. One of the illustrations used was the founder of Google. I can't remember his name, but he was brilliant when it came to search engine optimization and really understanding the technology that drove that. He stunk at HTML and writing code to make websites. So the reason Google is so simplistic in nature, it's a blank page with the word Google and a search bar, was because he sucked at HTML and didn't have enough money to go hire a bunch. This is one of the illustrations in that book, Beautiful Constraint. Had he had a lot of money or HTML, it might have looked like Yahoo, which if you remember at that time was just a super busy search page with all this other news and links, and just you get lost in it. And the magic of Google was the constraint. He didn't know HTML and he didn't have money. So he built what he could do, but he did know the engine behind it to search the internet effectively. He knew how to do that. And so I think that whole concept of the obstacle is the way is so powerful. And probably I like to say that the theme of my life is getting back up. And I think that's kind of the obstacle is the way message.
Well, and you talk about constraint, that reminds me of just another lesson I learned in my career. I was a district manager at MetLife. If you recall, Chris decided to take a sabbatical.
Yes.
And 𝗪𝗏 stepped in as kind of the interim leader at that time. We weren't sure what was going to happen in the region. Well, one of the regionals, I had North Idaho in my territory, Coeur d'Alene, but I didn't have Boise. Well, the regional in Boise left and they gave me Boise. And so I'm like, yay, hooray. And then I found out probably everybody was going to depart and go with their leader. And so 𝗪𝗏 and I scheduled a trip to go to the branch, and we scheduled a meet, and there was probably 15 loan officers, and we scheduled to meet with each of them over a 2-day period. And this is one of the probably biggest leadership lessons I've learned in my career, was watching how 𝗪𝗏 handled those meetings. because I knew people were coming in to tell us that they probably weren't going to stay. And I'm like, why are we meeting with all these people? I was kind of pissed. Like, they're all going to, if they're going to leave, I'm going to be sitting here with an empty branch. We've got all these expenses. She took the time to ask them why they were leaving, and to honor them in their decision. And
regardless of what
regardless of what their decision was, and to leave the door open if something was not okay in their next journey. And
if you're new to this business, or if you're watching this and you're not in this business, that is as rare as anything you can imagine.
So rare.
Yeah.
So rare. I mean, it was, I like trying to, at first I was kind of like, really, this is where this is going? And by the end, I was right there with her. Yes, let us know if we can help you, call us anytime. And it was such a remarkable lesson for me in grace and leadership, and truly, we're people. People have to make decisions for themselves. Like, I'm not making your mortgage payment. I'm not putting your kid through college. And there might be a time when you may have to leave my team. I coach with a guy named Richard Milligan with 4C Recruiting. I strong-armed him to giving me 30 minutes every week. He's just a remarkable coach for me. And I remember he told me, on your leadership journey, he grew up on I'm probably butchering this, on a farm where they had oak trees. And he said, my parents wound up having to sell that farm, and then we had just planted like a whole grove of oak trees that had just started to sprout. And he said, I came back to that piece of property 10 years later, and I saw this full grove of oak trees that was just beautiful. And he said, sometimes people will leave you and you will not get to be a part of their full journey to see who they become, but just know that you get to be a part of their journey and impact their lives. And I think about that often, like, and especially in our business, we do have some turnover and people do make different choices. And instead of being mad about it, hope that, the time that they spent with us was something they could bring into, their next walk, whatever that is.
Yeah, and you don't know who's going to leave, but you also don't know who's going to come. I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's something along the lines of, old men plant trees, the shade of which they will never sit in, which is similar to your illustration of the oak trees.
Yes.
And old people plant trees, the shade of which they will never sit in. You don't know who's going to sit in the shade of the tree you created. And one of the marvelous things about your story, I know you personally. I don't know RoseMarie well. I know her. I'm a fanboy. Don't tell her that. And I hope this doesn't go out on the podcast.
Pretty sure she's going to listen to this.
I have always admired and respected her, watching her mostly from afar. I met her a few times at manager events in Texas for First Horizon, and have always just followed her career with great appreciation, affection, and respect, because of the consistency in the way she leads. And she did it back then, and she's still doing it today.
Yes.
I'm sure she's going to tell, we get to chat with her on Wednesday.
Yes.
So I'm sure she's going to talk about the ways in which she's evolved and learned across the way. But it doesn't surprise me that the two of you were drawn to each other in leadership roles to work together and to serve together, because it just is so remarkably consistent in how you approach life and how she approaches life, and then what you've built together.
Yeah, I always say never bet against RoseMarie David.
Oh my gosh.
Never.
Wow.
Like, I don't know why anybody would. She's got the most capacity of any leader I've worked with in my career, honestly. I don't even know how to put it into words, working with her for all these years. She's carried our team, literally carried our team on her shoulders at times. And I don't know where she gets the strength from, but it's truly remarkable. I feel so fortunate. I look at my career, and I had some really bad bosses early in my career, but I wound up with two really remarkable leaders, and that was Chris Altig and RoseMarie David for the last, since 2003. So the last 20 years. I'll never forget when I took the district manager role, Chris told me, he had a meeting with us, and he's like, okay, this is what you can expect. This is what I want you to do. But he left us with a couple of parting thoughts. He said, number one, your name won't be in lights anymore, because I was a top producer, right? I was making President's Club, and I was the units girl. I'd always qualify, on units, not volume. He said, give away all the good and own all the bad. And that just sums it up for me. It's like, as leaders, we want to give our people as much good stuff. We can't take the glory. We need to give the glory away. And if we have the pissed off customer, call that customer. Let them yell at you, right?
Yep.
even if you didn't do it, own it,
Yep.
own it,
Because
own
it
it.
happened under your watch.
And that for me, I mean, it didn't even really come into, I thought, oh, that's interesting. But until you actually get into the role and really understand what the role is, now you're getting, my results now became other people's results. And that's a really hard thing when you're a top producer, especially in 07. You know, I took that job in 07 and then the market, you know, went to hell. And I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I just gave up my production. I just went into a role where my job is growth and we're in a shrinking environment. And I just hung on to.
Well, and now you're paid on other people's production in a really bad market.
Exactly. I'm like,
Or profitability, one or the other.
It was, yes. And I gave my book of business to my mother-in-law. I think you know that my mother-in-law worked for me for a decade. She stepped into my production. She was my junior, and then she stepped in and took over my production, which was a beautiful thing. But it was a very discouraging moment for me. And then I just thought, you know what? I have no choice. I had 2 babies at home that were 2 years old. I had mouths to feed. My husband had decided to stay home. I literally had no choice. It was either
there
I
was
got to
no
go
backup plan.
do something else or I've got to move forward. And I can tell you the craziest thing, and people might want to fact check me on this, but it is true. I hired more people in the year when we didn't know, after First Horizon had announced that they were selling. We didn't even know who was going to buy us. And I hired more people that year than I had in the prior 2 years combined, because people are attracted to leadership, predictability. Predictability sounds boring, but it isn't. People want to know what you're going to do. And it's why people know, like, Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. They know he comes through under pressure. I'm not a big footballer, but you know, that one comes to mind.
Pretty consistent, yeah.
But, you know, I look back on that and I was able to recruit to the strength of my team and our leadership. Like, we're going to be fine no matter who buys us. And I still have people that work for me today. In fact, Sean Sterling, he's my manager in Spokane, and I hired Sean in 2007, and Countrywide was recruiting him at the same time.
I remember that.
And I don't think he'd mind me sharing the story, but I mean, Countrywide was writing some big checks.
Oh boy.
In that time.
Yep.
And we were at First Horizon and we worked for Chris Altick, and Chris was like the anti-big check.
Yep. Come here because you believe in it, not because we're writing you a big fat
Exactly.
6-figure signing bonus.
I'm just going to tell you, we were not offering him near the money. And in the end, he chose to come here, which, you know, we're just so fortunate to still have him on my team today. But I kind of, like, Countrywide went under like 8 months later.
Yep.
So I'm like, see, Sean, you know, you did the right thing.
We didn't chat much about Chris, but Chris fits that same leadership profile.
Absolutely.
He certainly understands the metrics, and he gets how this business has to work and how we're measured. But at the end of the day, he leads from the heart.
He does.
And people matter.
Did you know his son works for me now? He's
I
one of
didn't
my
know
top
that.
loan officers
I
and sales
didn't know
managers
that.
in Spokane. Chase.
That's extraordinary.
Hi, Chase. Yes, he's his dad. He's a little mini me, and he's amazing. In fact, Chris called me. I'll never forget. It was my mom's birthday, June 5th. This was like 10 or 11 years ago. He's like, hey, I have a favor. My son just graduated from college, and he really thinks he might want to get into the mortgage business. Would you mind, you know, interviewing him? I'm like, of course. So,
well, that consistency you talked about, Nat, and I don't want to belabor this point too much,
Yeah.
but I remember my own experience when it was clear that First Horizon was going away. I was a district manager in Oregon. I didn't buy in. Instead of focusing on the leadership team that we had, I focused on MetLife. Who wants to work for a big insurance? I really allowed myself to go negative on who
Right.
MetLife was. And I never spoke that out in the marketplace, but my primary job was recruiting, filling seats, and hoping to achieve what you achieved during that time period. And I simply didn't, because in my mind, my talk was negative. My self-talk was, MetLife, really?
Yeah.
That's the best you guys? And then, of course, came out that they had to sell or shut down. So it wasn't like we were in a strong negotiating position.
Yeah, exactly.
But I didn't own that. You know, I talked about being a fanboy of 𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏. One of my regrets is that I didn't stick around long enough to continue to be a part of that team, because I think I had some mistakes in my choices of places I went, and I never, again, worked for somebody like Chris or 𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏, which had I done that, I probably would have stayed in the same spot for a long time. But I allowed myself to let the negativity of that decision affect my ability to execute and do my job.
It's easy to do. You talk about being constrained. I mean, as salespeople, and I'm a salesperson, you know, I see the shiny object, and there have been times where I'm like, gosh, maybe I should chase that, you know. But what I do know, especially, I'm 50, I'm going to be 51 in November. So almost 51. I just can't even believe it. You know,
Crimea River.
With age and experience comes some wisdom, you know, and what you realize, after 3 decades in this business is, number one, where you are is just geography.
Correct.
So the company, and I hope CMG is my team forever, because I think CMG is a wonderful company, but I'm prepared for the fact that maybe one day it won't be. I'm not basing my decision on the fact that CMG is the greatest company. It's the greatest company for my team today, but it may not be in the future. And so there is constraint that has to come with those decisions, and they do feel counterintuitive at times. But I always tell my guys, we overestimate what we can do in short periods of time. Like, we can lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks, but we underestimate what we can do over longer periods of time. And I tell my team, especially right now, we are in the long game. You are not going to see the results for your activities today. You need to focus on the discipline and the activity and not the results, because we know that this market, we do not have control over what's happening in this market.
And you never have.
Exactly. And we need to play the long game. So
the truth is, Nat, whether you're an originator back in the early days, or you're a district manager, or now you're an SVP of retail for the Western region, your success has never come from the logo on your business card. It's always come from your own self and your own commitment to a personal integrity and a path and a way of doing business, and the team that you've surrounded yourself with. That's always been the case. And there have been some really great logos, and some probably that you might have traded in for other logos, but it's never been about the logo. It's been about who you are and who you're with.
Well, I look at my team, and we try and create value and be, the person that can help drag you across the finish line, right? Like, in that, I mean, and sometimes sometimes I need that, and
sometimes kicking and screaming.
Sometimes we just have to lock arms and be there for one another. And like I said, that sounds kind of, airy-fairy, but you said something on, I think it was your podcast that I listened to, that you're a connector, right? And people crave connection more than anything. And as we came out of COVID, people were so starved for connection. And we're still seeing the ramifications, especially with our youth. I will tell you, our youth got the total shaft during COVID. And I had 2 daughters in high school during that time. But people want connection. They want to know that they matter and they're a part of something bigger. And if you can't give them that, somebody else will.
Absolutely.
And that is with your own team or people you're trying to look at to bring onto your team. So we're value creators on my team. That's what it's about. We're servant leaders. We're not just talk, we're walk. And we're not perfect by any stretch. I certainly am not. And the one thing I have learned at this point in my life is I literally know nothing, right? You think you have it all figured out, and truly you have nothing figured out.
Talking with Ken about the Coop and his vision for the future here, he talks about being mission focused, that's the whole purpose of being here, is to be mission focused, not metrics focused. Of course, again, the metrics have to make sense. You gotta make enough money to keep the lights on and pay the bills and hire people and keep good people. But his commitment is to stay true to the mission, and that's as an observer from afar. That's what I've witnessed in you and your career with Rosemary and Chris Haltig back in the day, and I'm just jazzed to have been that observer and watch what you have crafted and created. And I'm just really grateful you were able to come in today.
This has just been such a treat for me, and to get to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Way too long.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
And look forward to chatting again soon.
Yes, hopefully it won't be so long.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Kirk.